Hello, welcome everybody, and this is our multilingual learning in the multilingual world MOOC, and today's our first hangout, so welcome. And I just start this by introducing myself, and I'm Katja Frumberger, and I work as a research associate at the University of Glasgow.
And I'm Giovanna Fassetta. I work at the University of Glasgow here in the School of Education. And behind us, you can see the Twitter sphere. So if you are following us on Twitter, there will be live tweets from this hangout.
And you have met Grazia and Kasia somewhere on the MOOC, and you have probably spoken to them or chatted with them before. So first of all, a big thank you to everybody who joined our course, and we must say we're really blown away by your comments and your interactions, and yeah, it has been a great week so far, and it's very clear to us that all of you, you have joined us for this adventure too, and that you already value the languages you speak, and you're open to value the languages around you, and it has been a great pleasure to read all your comments. And just to say that what has come up for us is that a lot of your comments and a lot of your interactions were about how languages are connected, and not only linguistic tools for transaction and getting things in an economic sphere, but that languages are very deeply connected to our emotions, to our identity, to our sense of belonging, and that sometimes these emotions are not clear-cut, they're not always good, and they're not always bad. They sometimes exist in gray zones, and sometimes we have to negotiate these emotions. And thank you for all your comments. Just one other point. So
I think, I think, do you want me to take over? I think what we wanted also to make sure is that we wanted to stress the fact that we don't dismiss the need to use language to communicate the instrumental dimension of language, which is very important. But what we were keen to do in our MOOC, it was to stretch this a little bit and to investigate and to delve deeper into the other ways in which languages are important to us, which are a bit more personal, relate a bit more to our emotions, to our ideas of belonging, to our ideas of how we live in a particular space, and what our role in this space is, and what our connection to these spaces are. So adding this dimension and trying to stretch the boundaries a little bit was one of the things that we were really keen to do, and which it seems that it's happening with all the discussion that is going on. And also to stress the fact that research shows that if people are allowed or are encouraged to hold on to the languages they speak and to expand their languages, the number of languages they speak, this gives them a strong foothold to learn other languages, including the dominant language in the case, for example, of people who come or migrate from different countries to the UK. As this is where we're speaking from, so this is another element which is very important in our MOOC, in our online course. And finally, the idea that, and this we hope it's something that, and it seems to be something that comes on from the debate, the idea that there are other forms that we can use to communicate and to expand the power of languages, which are forms that come from the arts and that relate and rely on non-verbal means of communicating. And this is both something which happens in the classroom, where we can start from the languages that our pupils or our students speak, but also acts as a metaphor for the wider society, in which all languages can have a space, can have a dimension. And I think this will sort of bring us onto our questions and onto the questions, starting with the question on migratory aesthetics, which I think, Katy, we're going to talk about a little bit.
So first of all, we're sorry if some of you find the kind of summary of the academic text difficult. And I think it is, I fully agree, the idea of a non-concept doesn't maybe feel it doesn't make sense first. And I think, so the way maybe to explain the migratory aesthetic and to say it's a non-concept is that given that you all have already talked about and agreed that language and cultural experience is a very fluid thing. So it depends on identity, it depends on sense of belonging, it is linked to our emotions, and that these feelings and these kind of, entanglements they're changing all the time. So it's very difficult to abstract from these very entangled and ever-changing experiences and say, well, this is what it is. This is the concept. So in some way, migratory aesthetic just invites us to look at the singularity of these experiences, to say, okay, these are very specific singular experiences of people. How can we engage with that? And so in some way, it's almost like a refusal of explaining too quickly, but an invitation to engage and be open to multilingual encounters, to intercultural encounters, and then to think, how can that change me as a human being, and what does that mean for society more widely? In the example in the text, so Mieke Bal is a Dutch scholar who comes from sort of art history. That's her background, and she came up with this term migratory aesthetic. And in the article, it's the example of herself conducting an interview for a film, which is traditionally an interview aesthetic, you might say, in this situation might be conducted in a lingua franca, which often is English. In this case, in her example, she's a researcher. She's normally a woman in power. She controls communication, often in English. In this situation where a man who can't speak English, who can't speak French, so they don't have a common language, can't interact with her, she has to let go of her power to control communication in this situation and open the space for the Farsi speaker to come in and take the space and communicate in the space and speak his language, thereby dignify his language expression, and also take, for that moment, kind of the power imbalance has been destabilized. So this is just one example of the kind of openness to new languages, to new cultural experiences, which as a result can have shifts of power, for example. So in the example, you have then, in the face of the shift of power and kind of English being spoken, people need to draw on non-linguistic resources, for example, body expression, the tears are mentioned, physical contact. So through the experience of communicating in something else other than English or even in language, the communicative space has been opened out, and if you like, a new aesthetic, a new communication aesthetic has been created, and this might be an example for migratory aesthetic.
Can I just sort of intervene on that, because I think it's a very interesting idea. And again, I think to go back on some of the comments, this is not to mean it's not an either or situation. We're not saying that you need to always let go of understanding and we don't need to understand each other. It is very important, obviously, in many cases that we do understand each other, and there are practical reasons why we communicate and we want to be understood. But there are also spaces when this doesn't need to be the case, when we can let go of the need to always understand and just enjoy the language or the communicative experience as a form of without needing to put a content to it. And this, I think, happens quite emblematically in the little SoundCloud space that we have. I don't know. I know that some of you have had problem with the SoundCloud and recording things, but if you do manage to enter it, there are a few recordings there which are absolutely beautiful, and I must say that I've enjoyed listening to them, despite the fact that in most cases I had no idea what was said, but it was still an interesting and lovely experience. But to move on to another question about how to increase or how to improve the way in which languages and the attitudes toward languages in English-speaking country, which was another question that came up, and it's a very, very important question that we in the UK face particularly. And English-speaking countries often think that it's an advantage to be able to speak English, but you can also be an upstage of English in that it limits your experience to and your openness to other languages. So I think it is essential for this in this respect to go back to the drawing board when it comes to language policy, and really start thinking about which languages we want to teach and learn, why some languages and not others. So what are the groundings for some languages and the grounds on which we want to teach and learn them, and how do we do that? How much space do we give them? In the UK, and in Scotland, the space that is given to the teaching of languages in school is very, very limited. Definitely nowhere near enough to allowing for any form of competence to be reached. So it's not surprising that many children many children and young people never get to the point at which they can actually start enjoying the language. And also it is important, we believe, to expand the range of languages that are available to people. It is true that we need languages as skills to communicate. It is true that we need languages for the labour market, but it is also true, as many of you pointed out in the course of the course, that languages are a lot more besides these things. Languages carry with them powerful emotional connotations. They are part of our histories, they are part of our cultures, they are part of who we want to be in the future and where we might want to be in the future. They are part of faith, they are part of literature and art. So all these dimensions need to be considered when we decide which languages we choose to teach. What we are doing now in the UK and in Scotland is teach mainly the 4 languages, which are the traditional 4 languages that have been taught. So French, German, Italian and Spanish, with the addition now and increasingly of Chinese as an instrument towards the labour market. And I mean, there's not to say that these languages should not be taught, but perhaps we could expand this to include other languages, some of which can be the languages that are heard in the streets of our countries, increasingly with the increase of the number of migrants that come in the movement of people. So these are all things to be considered and to be discussed openly and critically, because when we make language policies, we make choices, and they are arbitrary choices, and we can make some choices, but we can also make other choices. In relation to the context of education, I personally feel that the attitude towards language needs to be modelled in all spheres of education, in all fields, not just when doing the language class, and that the languages that other pupils might speak need to have a space in the class, which doesn't mean that we need to be experts. We can't be experts at all languages, but it needs to be, we need to model the fact that you don't need to be an expert to appreciate the language and to be curious about the language and to include it, because we know that that it's an important grounding for people to be able to express themselves, and by expressing themselves in their own language and by finding a place for the language in a classroom, that gives them and I think I'm repeating now myself, but that gives them the opportunity and the space to feel valued as a person, and that will improve their way and their attitude towards also the dominant language, English in our case. Yeah, do you want to add anything to that?
Did you come to the end of?
Ah, yes.
And I just wanted to add to that. The kind of the value of people expressing themselves and how pertinent that is if in today's world. And I'm just thinking of my own experiences and here in Glasgow, working with teachers at mainstream colleges who mainly work with students, with young people with refugee backgrounds, who I'm just thinking of one classroom. So you might have a classroom of 20 students with 17 languages. All in one ESOL class, so all learning English, but bringing a vast richness, a plentiful richness of language experience, of cultural experiences. So just from the point of view of just cultural capital, social capital these students bring, and to leave that untapped in a pedagogical environment is of course what is problematic in many points, but also how important it often is for students who have gone through maybe traumatic experiences or stress to be acknowledged in their identity in the classroom, to have a space to express themselves, and where experiences might be bound up in certain languages or social practices. So the importance of valuing these multiple languages then becomes important on many levels, so not only political level, but maybe even on a psychological level, so where we then speak about well-being and all these sort of things. So it has many different dimensions. Chiharu and Adele were asking, so they sort of talked about this open door attitude and how this could be cultivated in the classroom, and kind of just even taking this classroom I was just talking about as an example, and Giovanna already started to mention it. There are many language educators, especially sort of if you look around in the field of intercultural language education, who propose the integration of sort of multimodal activities and performative approaches in the language classroom. And later in our online course, we'll have examples of these educators and some examples of methods to do that. So, for example, there are many people who use nonverbal picture books that draw on children's language experiences, that just facilitate a space through the nonverbal activity, take it as a starting point for conversation, which can be multilingual, for other multimodal activities, things like drawing or drama, to tap into students' real-life experiences and their understanding of the world, and take their viewpoints and their experiences, as a way for the acquisition of English, but also for the appreciation of their own social practices.
So what questions do we have? There was a question about, can we ever truly translate from one language to the other? And I think there's a very interesting discussion going on in one of the steps. Now I can't remember which step is it?
It's the step invention of monolingualism.
The invention of monolingualism, about software, and whether we can have software that translates really the meaning of languages. This relates to David Gramling's point about the fact that there's a tendency, he argues, and as you'll have seen in the video, actually in the audio podcast, a tendency for languages to be homogenized so that it's easier to pass from one to the other, and which allows for software to do the translation. And someone was asking, can we ever truly translate from one language to the other? And I personally think that we can go close to it, but perhaps never quite be there. But you might be it's open to discussion, this. I personally don't know much about translation software, but we are assured that there are now software that is mimicking people's learning processes, and so that a computer can actually learn a language. I'm talking about things that I don't know much about, so I'll invite you to check that discussion there. There is, however, always, I think there are things that a computer will never do, and even phone translation is seen as having limitations, even if you have two people, but the lack of contact and the physical and the non-verbal clues, which are part of language, which are part of communication, make it very difficult to actually use phone translation. And it's been tried out in the health sector. It's cheaper than having people translate, but it's not without its limitations. So whether a software will be able to do that or not is going to be quite an interesting thing, and I'm open to learning more about that.
And it reminds me of one of your examples in the course. I think maybe Jacqueline. I'm not quite sure about the name now, but she had this lovely example of translating in a business situation with two men who didn't have English as their first language, but that was the language of communication. And she had to draw a lot on their nonverbal communication in order to make this translation happen. So I just love this image that, she jumped the gap and improvised. And the translation that came out of this might not be seen as a, very, very instrumental transactional translation of one word to the next, but it's a translation that draws on all sorts of modalities, and in itself is almost a piece of art, this piece of translation. So I would say, can we ever truly translate from one language to the other? No, we can't, but that's a really good thing. And maybe that's the reason also today that when you see a book translation, the translator is always mentioned right next to the author, because the translator is now recognized as being an artist in its own right, because the act of translation is an act of making. It's not just an act of representation or of instrumental. It's not. You can't just press a button and the right translation comes out. It's always about interpretation.
But we're told that it might be possible in the future.
Maybe. We'll see.
And there is also, I think, the great advantage when people live in multilingual environments, or lead multilingual lives, of being able to move between languages and to use different languages at different moments, and translanguaging is quite an important skill that probably many of you out there, because it seemed to us that all the learners that we have in this course are people who speak several languages, and so speaking several languages gives you this elasticity of being able to draw from different linguistic repertoires to convey different things, and switching between languages in a family environment, for example, is another important skill that is increasingly recognized as a form of language in itself, rather than as something to be avoided, or a mistake, or an interference. Do we have any other questions? Are people posting questions?
Did you post questions?
No, I can't see any.
Nobody posted any questions.
Where's everyone?
I can't see.
No, this should be down there.
Right. So please do, if you have any questions just now, please post
yes,
them.
If any one of you
anything.
are watching this live rather than recorded. There were, okay, so as we wait and see if anyone turns up with more questions, there was someone also, and I apologize for not having written down the names, but someone posted a question about should we make people, migrants, learn the language of the country that they're coming to. And this was a question, and I think it had also a link to a newspaper article in which was quite a recent one, in which Cameron said, the Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister said that women should be made to learn English, if I remember it correctly off the top of my head. Muslim women, sorry, it was actually quite specific. And this was a question, and our apologies, but we will not reply to this question today because we hope that you will want to come with us into week 2. And week 2 will be very much about this kind of discussion about the links between language and migration, and who decides what is a good language and the appropriate language to speak, and what this means.
Yeah. Another question by the same person was about the kind of oppressiveness of monolingual policies, and I mean, this is something that is obviously from context to context different. But yes, I mean, all the examples we were just trying to give, if you just take the example of a classroom, again, a rich multilingual classroom, let's say here in the UK, where, you know, often speakers who come with maybe 3 languages they already speak, and they arrive in a classroom in the UK, and all of a sudden they're positioned as having no language, or, you know, lacking language skills. And obviously this can only be possible in an environment where the language they already bring are devalued, because English, or even middle class English, a certain type of English, is the language against which every other language is being judged. So yes, in that moment, in this particular context, and with a very concrete example, then these monolingual policies become a form of oppression, because the speaker is not able to flourish or even express themselves with the social practices they bring, including their languages.
Sorry, I was having a look because I was clicking about to check, as we were expecting to have some questions live, so I'm not sure whether these whether we have any questions here.
You just click on it.
No, I don't want to lose everyone. No. No.
We have a question on Twitter.
You have a question on Twitter? Whoa, okay.
She couldn't post on the Google page, so she's asking us on Twitter.
Right.
Could you address the connection culture language from Miriam?
Mm-hmm.
Good question.
Very good question.
Yeah,
very good question. A huge question.
It's a very good question and a huge question. Yes. The connection between culture and language. I think of course, one language, I think there is a connection between culture and language, but one language can carry with it many cultures. So it is not a direct connection. It is not one culture, one language, and one language, one culture. That is not to say that there are no cultural elements within a language which are specific to that language, but there might be several, depending on where the language is spoken, on the specific geographical, historical, social, also generational elements that come into it. So yes, it is not a univocal connection. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, maybe just to say that if you look at the development in, for example, language education and sort of the research on that, then you kind of see that development where, language and culture are treated as something quite different. So, and maybe in the 70s, were very clear that you would teach language, as communication and whatever concepts of grammar, and acquisition and those sort of things. And then only later, in culture, I think still today, and is sometimes taught in language classes, taught as something separate. So now we learn something about German culture, and this can be elite culture, so it could be literature, or art, or it could be about the kind of more everyday behavior of peoples, or the quirks, and the things they do, or the things they like to eat or to wear, and the stereotypes. And then you have the language class where you acquire your language structures. But what the trend, what's happening in language education is that is now not being seen as something separate. So lots of people refer now to language education as intercultural language education, for example. Mm-hmm. So where you can't separate out the teaching of the language from the teaching of culture. And you have terms developing like, for example, languaging. So where it's the process of acquiring a language is seen as a kind of multisensory process that always involves your body, that always involves all your senses. So you already see when you're languaging, so when you're making sense of the world, drawing on people's nonverbal expression, on the environment, on your body, on language, on on all sorts of things, the separation is very difficult. So you almost have to, you have to think from within a position of being entangled in all these things rather than being able to step outside of it. So So these developments in language education are really quite interesting, and how that then translates into the classroom, where yes, we are in these times and in these moments in time, we are entangled in all sorts of cultures and languages in our classrooms. And how do we deal with that? How do teachers deal with that? Or deal with it in a wider society, and through policies, how do we accommodate all these things?
I was looking at you, and I was going to apologize with any of you out there who are might be trying to post on the questions on the Google Hangouts. I don't know what doesn't work and why that doesn't work. It should be working, and so really sorry about that.
Seems to be enabled.
Is it enabled? Yeah. Sorry.
Yes, it seems to be enabled.
But if you have access to Twitter and you want to use Twitter instead, yes. Kasia and Grazia are busy checking your tweets right now, so we can have some interaction, which would be good.
This gives us, of course, the opportunity to ramble on as long as you wish, because which is not necessarily a good thing. So apologies if we're completely missing the mark here.
But no, it's not working, obviously.
No, it's not working.
Okay. Do we have any more questions from our viewers? Not at the moment.
Oh, what a shame.
That's a real pity.
So
I'm trying to.
I could, for example, speak about the speaking your language as a
oh yes,
form of
please.
migratory.
Or you can actually talk about it. You have come across the video Speaking Your Language, which I think many of you praised very much, and which is the video in which different people are speaking and greeting in different languages. And Katya was involved in making this this video, and I think that relates back to migratory aesthetics, so back to perhaps this question that many people had: what does it mean? So perhaps yes, talking about that might also clarify a little bit more about the migratory aesthetic. So, while we wait, anyone wants to post a question, please use Twitter. And apologies again, we will find out what went wrong and we'll sort it out.
Definitely. So the film Speaking Your Language, I made this with a filmmaker, and I'm just going to talk you through the process a little bit to explain how we arrived at the film, which I think can be seen as a form of migratory aesthetic. So the Speaking Your Language video, I claim here, is a form of migratory aesthetic. So the way we arrived at this film was that I invited people throughout our University of Glasgow, to come and just celebrate their languages and tell us how they felt about the language, how they felt connected to the languages, what was their feeling about speaking their language. So a lot of people came, and we had an immense wealth of people with many different languages, and I was the interviewer for the film. And I only speak German and English fluently. So you can imagine, with the richness of languages, the many languages that were offered to us during this film interview, I didn't understand any of them, or most of them. So on a linguistic level, this was a very uncomfortable situation for me, because I couldn't engage. And to be honest, so one of the principles was, okay, you know, you would celebrate people's languages, but obviously you can't celebrate people's languages by them just speaking about it in English, because the beauty of a language, as many of you have discussed, kind of unfolds when it's spoken, when it's celebrated, when it's sung, when it's, you know, when it's recited in poetry, when it's just spoken even. So that our interview space had to be a space where people spoke their languages. So me sitting there and listening to people speaking about, you know, different things, their relationship to the languages, touch experiences, all sorts of things in their own language, was uncomfortable for me. And very similar to the example in the Migratory Aesthetics article, I had to sort of make a decision to value people's languages as a form of aesthetic expression that went beyond the mere linguistic. So for myself, in my head, I had to say, okay, this is me appreciating rhythms. This is me looking at nonverbal. This is me at looking for things that I can actually connect to and engage with, because I'm incompetent in most of these languages. I can't understand, I can't engage, but I still want to engage with you as a human being, as a person. So how can I bridge that gap? And this was just opening out my ears in some way to these sort of more aesthetic aspects of the languages. So this was one kind of big learning experience for me when interviewing for the film. And then later, so translated into the post-production phase, so when we were editing the film and putting together the footage, we wanted to, in the film, replicate these experiences of feeling incompetent, but also recognizing that a language is so much more than just the linguistic and the language, that it is so much more than the verbal. So in the film, the way we were editing it, we put the songs, the multilingual songs, at the beginning of scenes, but we also started the scenes with languages other than English. So we sometimes you're experiencing a moment where you can't understand, because we don't show you the lingua franca immediately, but we tease you with languages you don't understand. and that hopefully invite you to engage on a non-verbal level. And I think I'm just saying that I think a lot of you did, because that's what you wrote in your comments, that you were listening almost like you were listening to a movie, or you read a poem. You were reading between the lines rather than, you know, grabbing the language. And I must say that in the editing of the film, this was not a very obvious thing to do. So what happened was that first the musical expressions of people, so their songs in other languages, to me that was always very obviously something that you could show to people who don't speak the language, because it's music, and music translates beyond linguistic boundaries. So those songs were always at the beginning of scenes in the film. The non-English languages, however, there weren't. So I had to consciously remind myself that listening to a language, even if it's just spoken, not sung, is the same thing. It's also an aesthetic expression. It doesn't have to be sung, it doesn't have to be music, it doesn't have to be poetry. The everyday speaking of a language I don't understand is a beautiful thing and should be valued as that. So it can be put at the beginning of scenes. It can be used in a film to open scenes. It doesn't have to be English. It doesn't have to be something you immediately understand.
We have a question.
Yay! Okay, I shut up.
But you only have like 5 minutes.
Okay. Yeah. Do you think more should be done in UK schools to encourage students to take up new languages?
Okay, so the question we have is, do we think that more should be done in British schools to encourage pupils to take on more languages? And I think we'll be going to be answered very quickly. Yes, we do think so. We think it is important, and again, to maybe connect a little bit with what Katja was saying just now, starting from the languages that the pupils already speak and valuing them without this meaning that we had to learn every language that every pupil speak. We realize, and we're quite open to the fact that that is not doable, but by showing an appreciation for other children's languages, for other people's languages, it's already a first step. And then again, as we said, also trying to encourage and a greater variety of language, more time devoted to languages, which might also gradually build towards some of the content of the curriculum being delivered in languages rather than other than English. So using languages also to teach and in different languages. This is something that is already happening in Italy. I'm not 100% sure how well it is, but it's in all final year of Liceo, which is the Lyceum, the final year of secondary school, children have to learn content, one subject in a different language. I will say in brackets that unfortunately that seems to be always English. But building gradually towards this, it's also very important, and also it should be perhaps also societal effort as well, in which more value is given to languages outside the school by the families, of course, who should be encouraged to maintain languages other than English and to teach them to their children and to make the most of it, but also maybe a conscious effort by policy makers to make available out there more material which is not in English. There are things, quite rarely though, that are in languages other than English on TV and films, etc. But unfortunately, the dominance of the Anglophone media making restricts this quite a lot, but exposing children to films and cartoons and things in other languages, because actually, making an effort to make these available would also be another way. So having more languages all over us and making more use of languages that are around us, of course, valuing these resources, a first step and a first big step, I think.
Thank you, and I think we have come to an end. It's 1:45, and just thank
in the
you.
UK.
It's quite true in the UK. So thank you very much if you have followed this live, and if you see it on YouTube, thank you as well.
Thank you.
And I hope you're going to join us for week number 2, and also maybe join our hangout at the end of next week.
Where we will make sure that the live comments are available on Hangouts, and again, our apologies if that didn't work.
Yes, very much. Apologies and thank you and auf Wiedersehen. Vielen Dank, dass ihr mitgemacht habt. Wir konnten euch nicht sehen, aber wir haben euch, ihr wart da und bis nächste Woche hoffentlich.
E arrivederci da me e grazie di essere stati con noi.
Ciao.
Ciao.